Very good. Well, I really dig your story. I'm looking forward to getting into it. And I think right now in our nation's history, it's probably more important than ever to, bring up this dialogue of treating everybody with equality and fairness.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is something I've wrestled with for probably 30 plus years, and COVID gave me an opportunity to do more research and to actually write a book.
So I guess that's the way I want to begin everything is, COVID did do a reset. It did a lot of things to us. And 4.5 years ago, we were really looking at this and trying to figure out how it was going to pan out. So ultimately, how did you get through that time period and how has it changed your perspective now?
Uh, so, so, when I started writing, I knew I wanted to write something. I didn't know that it was a book. And as I began writing, I was in my first few months of research and writing, I already had 100 pages worth of stuff. It's like, well, this is not going to be an article. And I'm only part way through. I mean, I've kind of looked at the period of slavery. I've looked at how did we even begin to identify race, going back to the 1400s. And, I was partway through Jim Crow, and it's like, well, I guess I'm writing a book. I wrote a book, had a manuscript, shopped it around. Everyone said way too long, needs more focus. So I then spent the next 2.5 years rewriting the whole thing
Wow.
and came up with something that I felt like was a lot more cohesive, coherent, compelling, still long, but it's been a labor of love, and I feel like I learned a hell of a lot. I thought I knew a lot. I learned 90% of what I wrote, I did not know.
Wow.
And I've been reading about race for, like I said, 30 years.
So that's the thing about going into a project like this, writing a book. It's usually revelatory. There's usually a lot of things that you figure out because you think you're going in to impart your knowledge and research knowledge, but that's the irony of it, is that ultimately you come to this crossroads where you're like, I didn't realize any of this.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, so I moved to Washington.
Your 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 audio went out.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, we're
Okay.
good.
All right. I'm not used to this new microphone.
Oh, it's all good.
So I moved to Washington 36 years ago. And like I saw, having been in places like Hartford, where I grew up right outside, Boston, Philly, New York, Newark, Baltimore, DC, it's like, why are the races separated? Why is it still so segregated? And why, like in Washington, DC, is most of where African Americans live either um, kind of like a ghetto, right? And so, how is it that that happened? Why does it still exist? And I got to know a lot of African Americans. This city used to be called Chocolate City because it was a majority African American after white flight, and it is no longer. Actually, it's I think around 42% black at this point because there's been a lot of whites, Asians, Hispanics that have moved in the last 20 years. But again, just trying to figure, like, how did this happen in Washington, D.C.? Why is it still this way? What are the impediments? What's the ongoing policies and laws that are kind of keeping all this in place? I also remember having a conversation with a friend of mine, who I'm no longer in contact with, but he always said, "Well, it's a level playing field now. Everyone has the same equal opportunities." And I never had the ammunition that I really wanted to make the counter arguments. So I've spent, like I said, the last 30 years trying to understand it, and that pandemic gave me that window of time to really explore deeply.
So let's get into your career. Let's get into your work. Obviously, now you're a writer, but if we go back, I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of third graders at career day, and one of the kids says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer them?
That's a great question, and third graders might have a difficult time understanding. But so for the last 25 years, I have run public meetings on a wide range of issues affecting the public and communities, whether that's around um, transportation issues or around, um, land use and planning, around healthcare. So all the issues that adults grapple with in terms of the communities where they live, this is public meetings, usually for elected officials, where they have some policy they want to roll out or plans they're wanting people's input on. I facilitate those meetings to make sure that the public has a voice in what ultimately gets decided.
So
Now, I don't
what
know if a third grader could understand that, but I think perhaps middle school and high schoolers could.
Probably so. I mean, I would think like school board meetings, there'd be at some elemental level of them understanding it. But what did you want to be in the third grade? What was your dream to grow up and become?
Ah, well, third grade, I wanted to play for the Boston Red Sox.
Okay.
And then as I got older and realized, I'm not that great a baseball player, I wanted to be their full-time statistician.
Okay.
Uh, and even that didn't work out, right? I started in college with a math major and realized I was over my head. And I ended up majoring, believe it or not, in geography with a minor in economics.
Oh,
So
wow. Well, I have a desk calendar that's like sports related, and I just ripped it off today and saw what happened today. And I don't think you would like it, but it's the one moment if I could get into a time machine and go back in time and be at, I would be at. And it was
what's
game
that?
6 of the 86 series. It was the moment that ball went underneath Billy
Went
Buck.
under Bill Buckner's. Yeah,
I
I
was
was in New York City when that happened.
Wow. I was a Mets fan. My dad was raised in Long Island, so I had this
Okay,
affinity. But the year before the Royals won in
right,
85, so there was this combined euphoria, but there was something about that team. But this is the weird thing. I don't know if you knew this. You probably do as a Red Sox fan. I can't
right.
remember the guy's name, but Billy Buckner was not supposed to be in the late innings because he had knee problems, and whenever the air got real thick and humid, it would become a problem. But they wanted him on the field because there was only an out left, and they wanted him to celebrate because he was such a long-standing member of the team. And the irony is that that's what
It went
happened.
through his legs. Yeah, I honestly don't remember that part of the story.
Yeah,
Obviously he was in the game at a certain point because he was a great contact hitter. He was I don't know if he was a lifetime 300 hitter, but probably in the 290s. And
yeah,
what can go wrong at first base,
yeah.
right? And all
What
they
what's
all
the
they
big
need to do
deal?
is catch the throws that come to them.
Yeah, just a little Mookie squib. What's the big deal? It's like
Right, right, exactly.
so. This is the thing that gets me about your work and what you're doing, and what perplexes me about America in 2024. We go all of this time from Rosa saying, I'm not giving up my seat," to all of these levels of legislation and enlightenment and leaders that are leading us to a better place of understanding equality. Then we get a black president, and then we have now, and we've been plunged into before Rosa said no, as far as I'm concerned. We have definitely descended into a level of reversion that astonishes me. In your estimation, do you believe that's true? And if so, why?
So, I mean, you have to, and this is part of the history that I too didn't understand, right? So, anytime there is racial progress, especially with African Americans in America, there's always a strong pushback. It used to be much more overt,
Yeah,
right? When we Reconstruction, it was, well, we need to get, the Confederate leaders and supporters back in power in the South. And so Reconstruction lasted about a decade, maybe a little bit more, and the only thing that held it in place was the Union Army, right? Um, but throughout history, anytime uh, Eisenhower uh, helped integrate the military, right? There's still a lot of issues in the military. It's probably one of the better places in America in terms of race relations, but in the research that I've done at the academies, Air Force Academy, Naval Academy, et cetera, still a lot of individual racism that goes on. And there's still kind of the turning a blind eye to it. And so it becomes institutionalized, still there, it becomes systemic. But if you look at the 60s, because that was one of the major times that we could have made significant progress, right? With the Civil Rights Acts of 64, 65, 68, there was a huge pushback from Southern legislators about how far that could actually go, right? And the whole one of the big reasons why Nixon won the election in '68 was because he ran on a law and order platform, because there were all of these racial uprisings in cities across America after King got assassinated. And whites in a lot of places were threatened by that. It's like, no, we need to kind of tamp this down and get it more under control. And so, um, yeah, every time we see progress, so we desegregated schools in '54, right? Well, in the county I live in Maryland, it wasn't until it was a court ordered desegregation in 1971 or '72 that we even began to try to integrate the schools 18 years afterwards, right? And then soon after that happened, because there was some forced busing, as in other places, whites began to flee my county left and right. So every time we see progress, it was like when Obama was elected in 2008, it's like, oh, we're now in a post-racial society. It's like, no, we're not. Not if you look around, not if you see what's actually going on.
Yeah.
We're still incredibly segregated. I never understood, I said at the beginning, I never understood, like, well, so where did these ghettos come from? Well, it had everything to do with the policies and laws we put in place in the 20s, 30s, and 40s that forced blacks to go there, and they had no place else to go. And then as it got more and more overcrowded, we didn't even expand the ghettos, so it became a total mess. And it was completely white leadership across America that created all of those ghettos in every single city. And it took the longest time, like the whole Housing Act, Fair Housing Act in '68 was supposed to begin undoing that. But if you look at what actually happened, not much for quite a long time after 1968. So there's always kind of the what seems to be evident progress on the surface, and there's a lot of resistance and pushback underneath. And so I think what's happening now is it's just, the I don't know if you followed this, but the whole issue around critical race theory, which
Yeah.
is it's only taught in certain law schools across America, right? But
Yeah.
it was like all of a sudden it was the new boogeyman, and we can't let it be happening in our schools. So we got to shut it down. We got to ban books. We got to change curricula, and we can't make anyone uncomfortable with the actual history that happened,
Yeah.
right? And so that's been a struggle for the last 4, 5, 6 years. So again, if you know what you're looking for, and for a long time I didn't, you kind of sit there scratching your head. Why is this happening? How's this happening? I thought we had advanced more than this. And it's like, no, there's still a lot of protection of those who've been in power for a long time.
It's
Financial interests, all kinds of interests, right?
yeah, it's interesting because I have a jazz radio show, and a prominent musician here in Kansas
Right.
City who's African American is married to a white woman, and basically said once that happened in '08, everybody just went down in a bunker and seethed and got ready for when, yeah, the name that should not be named came in and started it up again and started fanning the flames of what we thought was gone. But he felt it, his whole life being, having that interracial marriage. So yeah, I figured as much, but I just wanted to see what your exact perspective is. So I'm curious, in your life and in your work and what you've done, who's been a hero? Who's been that inspiration for you?
You know, um, so the first place I look is outside the US. In 2007, I traveled with my now ex-wife and my then 3-year-old daughter to South Africa. My ex-wife is African American, and she was doing a leadership program for 3 weeks in a town called Stellenbosch. And we actually did a tour in Robbins Island, where Mandela was imprisoned for 27 years. And she and I back then, read his autobiography, and also read his biography. And the transformation that that man had while in prison was just truly remarkable. And what he was able to do for the time he was in power and in the time he was alive, also very remarkable um, in a country which could have very easily boiled into a civil war that would still be going on now. You know, the challenge in South Africa is similar to here. Um, Not enough changes happened there either racially, right? I mean, it's still whites still control kind of all the economic factors, although blacks control kind of the all of the politics. And like in a lot of places, it's become very corrupt. So, but I would say Nelson Mandela for sure, Martin Luther King for sure, Gandhi for sure. Um, and that to me, that's kind of my short list.
Yeah.
People who really made an attempt at some point in their lives to push against the powers that be in a nonviolent way and were able to galvanize literally millions of people behind the cause.
So of everybody that's alive today that's doing work for equality and justice and just in general, if you could meet one person and spend some time with them, who would it be?
So, you know, there's a lot. One person who also inspires me is Brian Stevenson. He wrote a great book called Just Mercy. When he got out of Harvard Law School, what he decided to do is to set up his own nonprofit legal firm in Birmingham, Alabama, and begin working on um, mostly men who were on death row and getting them off death row, and in some places getting them absolved of the crimes they actually had not committed. And he continues to do that great work, expanded that work. Recently, he opened up a museum that kind of memorializes lynching and has been able to track down 6,000 lynching cases. There's probably many more that occurred, you know, post Civil War all the way up until the 1950s. So you know, I think they made his book a movie, Just Mercy. I haven't seen it, but he's a remarkable man to me and what he's been able to do, and kind of in many ways speaking truth to power in the modern day.
So what is it that's the motivator for you to continue to do the work that you do, to continue to bring light to people that may not understand the real struggle and what can be possible? What is that? And then also to have enough to evolve as a human being yourself. What is that collective gas in your tank every day?
So you know, I like I said, I was married for 19 years to an African American woman, um, and you know, I had had my eyes opened many times before I met her and before I got married to her. But um, getting to know her family in the rural South and seeing the town she grew up in, which is, you know, Duplin County, North Carolina, is uh, uh, named after a gentleman who, and the town, the town that she grew up in was named after the largest slaveholder in Duplin County, North Carolina. And so just kind of seeing the present day evidence of the segregation and discrimination that happens there, trying to bring my two biracial kids up in a world that still can see them as an other and their friends as an other, that motivates me incredibly. And you know, having gotten to know and befriend and have colleagues, my business partner is African American, uh, who are African men, you know, Black people get this because they live it every day, right? What needs to happen, as far as I'm concerned, and really is ultimately the reason I wrote this book, how do more white people really find out our history, the unvarnished history? How do they find out how that has led to where we are today? So they'll be more open to, well, what do we need to do about that? How do we repair the centuries of damage that are still happening? How do we undo the decades of disinvestment in the neighborhoods where most African Americans live? So that's really what motivates me, and it's the great work that's being done all across the country. And I hope this is a small measure of what I can do as a white man, kind of fighting for the cause of racial justice and racial equity.
You know, I've always felt like, if you really feel strongly about something, no matter what color you are, and obviously we're white guys, you should go out and do it. And I remember years ago, I worked at a YMCA and ran a couple labs, inner city labs that was predominantly black. And I didn't even talk about race. I didn't get into it. I didn't I didn't qualify anything that way. I was just the guy that was there to help them, and it was good. It was there was an embracing. There was a level of understanding. In fact, yesterday I covered an event here in Kansas City called the 18th and Vine. It was an arts festival, and I'm an artist too. And
Okay.
I reached out to be a sponsor, and we were talking about I had this idea of giving them artwork to promote and whatever, and they're like, well, we're just promoting black artists. And I think for a lot of people they may be like, oh well, okay, well, why not? But I totally get it. It's underrepresented. They don't have their own festival. Kansas City has very prominent festivals that's mainly white, so I totally get it. But I think that there's a lot of people out there, like with you saying, levels of where did this start, retribution and all that, they think everything's fine. And it's not. And it
It's
hasn't
not.
been. And even
Right.
urban blight that happens on one side, like in our town, we have east and west side. And the east of Troost is the area that has the urban blight.
Right.
And
I've
it's a
been there.
continu yeah, and it's a continual problem. And it should be addressed and it should be taken care of with some collective measure. And I think if more people realized and embraced that and would do their part in just being a part of the solution instead of, ignoring it or saying it doesn't exist, I think we would be in a much better place to lift all boats.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, one of the things that I'm careful to acknowledge in the book, a lot of the reason why we have the challenges we do today were decisions made long ago by white leaders, right? That's just a fact.
Yeah,
Um, and so I think a lot of white people can get defensive. Well, my family didn't have slaves, or, I didn't live in the South, so I had nothing to do with Jim Crow, or whatever the case may be. It's not about pointing blame about something that white people now are doing, although there is the need to really explore at the organizational, institutional level, at the local policy level, what are some of the things that are still in place that are re-solidifying what already exists, right? It's
yeah,
like, in 2024 in Kansas City, why is there still a lot of blight there? Same as, same question for Washington, D.C., New York City, St. Louis, right? It's like, and what do we really need to do to reverse that? Like, how did this happen in these places? And now that we get that it was done long ago by white communities that were trying to keep themselves separate, right, from the other, how is it that 80, 90 years later it still exists? And what do we need to do to change that? Because we certainly haven't done enough. And there's been a lot of pushback for even when we have done stuff. So it's not that it's like, my white neighbor, it's his or her fault that we had slavery or that we had Jim Crow or that, we ran major highways straight through black neighborhoods. But we do have responsibility, I believe, now to think about, well, so what can we do now since we haven't done anywhere near enough up until now? And we have a special responsibility, I think, as white people to really be a part of that strategic conversation.
for sure. So, of everything that you've done and accomplished and evolved into, what are you the proudest of?
I got married late. I didn't get married until I was 38, almost 39. Had my second and last kid when I was 47. And I've always said, if I knew how great it was to be a dad, I would have started a lot earlier. But being a dad and just watching these little kids grow up to be their own separate, independent human beings is a fascinating thing. I'm incredibly proud of both my kids, 21 and 16, and who they are and how they're navigating these issues differently than I did, right? Because um, they actually have gone to schools that are more integrated. I grew up and there was like five black kids in a school of 2000, right? They're going to school with kids who are African American, African, Latino, Middle Eastern, kind of you name it, and they have those friend circles. Now that's not true for everyone growing up now because we are so separated and segregated, but we chose to live in a place that was highly diverse and where they could go to schools and have that kind of experience. So they're much more open-minded about who they are, who their friends can be and how they want to navigate in life. And at the same time, they've experienced discrimination and racism and the whole nine yards, even um, even where we live.
So what's been one of the best pieces of feedback that you've gotten from your book?
One of the things I'm proud of is I've got more than 80 reviews on Amazon for my book, almost all of them very positive, and a number of people just saying this is a book that we white people really need to read and understand. Kind of where does all this come from, and that I didn't just kind of leave us in this depressed, distressed place of oh my God, the history's so terrible, but really giving people I won't say a blueprint, but a series of really interesting, compelling, potentially transformative ideas in education, in the criminal justice system, in our economic systems of what we could do differently that would make a difference for African Americans, and if applied more broadly, could make more of a difference for people across race, right? One of the things that I'm inspired by, I don't know if you know of Reverend William Barber,
Yeah.
but he is picked up in this decade from what King was trying to do in the 60s, the Poor People's Campaign. And he's really trying to bring together a multiracial movement of poor people because there's 150 million people in our country living at or two times the level of poverty in America. And most of those people are white, right? The kind of the stereotype is, oh, it's black people that are white that are poor, but actually the majority of poor people with lower incomes are white people, and so he's trying to build a cross-racial movement around what can we do together to help people who are currently poor move up the economic and social ladder together.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, Steve, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, all of your readers, everyone that knows you, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Who do I think I am? Wow, tough questions,
Yeah,
Joe.
right.
I'm a guy who has evolved ever so slowly from someone who grew up very sheltered. I grew up in a all white town outside of Hartford, who made a conscious decision when I moved to DC that I was going to really connect in an authentic way with the African American community. So I feel like I now am a much more open person than I used to be, a more outgoing person than I used to be, and someone who has continued to figure out how do I fight for important social change and social justice.
Well
I don't
said.
know. Does that answer your
It
question?
certainly does. It's a big question. You did great. So if anyone wants to pick up the book, learn more about you, reach out, any of the good business, where do they go?
So the best place to get the book is on Amazon. It's never been a level playing field, overcoming eight racial myths to even the field. You can get it on your Kindle version, paperback version, hardback version. I started a newsletter 2 months ago called Leveling the Leveling the Field Finally. And so people can find me on Substack. Just look for Leveling the Field Finally. And I've got several hundred subscribers, and I write once or twice a week, kind of expounding upon the issues that I identify in the book, as well as some of the solutions.
I love it. Steve, thank you. Thank you for your work.
Thank you,
Thank you for
Joe.
sharing. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate you.
Yes, sir. Best of luck. Take care.